Briahna, I'm dying to know, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, Bill Maher went viral once again over the weekend after he weighed in on the artist formerly known as Kanye West's anti-Semitic statements. His guest of choice for this segment? Former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, if you're wondering why Maher would bring a former head of state who is currently in the middle of his own re-election campaign to weigh in on the manic ravings of a deeply troubled American rap artist, you're not alone. But listening even briefly to the interview reveals Maher's rhetorical strategy here. This wasn't just about rebuking anti-Semitism. Any number of people or institutions could have done that, including, say, the Anti-Defamation League. Even celebrities like Jennifer Aniston or Mos Def, take your pick. But Ye's week-long cycle of unhinged interviews, tweets, and leaked DMs was just a hook for a subject for which Maher has long demonstrated a significant appetite: erasing the ongoing humanitarian abuses by the Israeli government against Palestinians. Once you realize that this is the real subject of Maher's segment, the choice of guest becomes strikingly clear. Lest you think I'm being unfair, let's listen to the interview. After asking Netanyahu an initial jokey question about whether Israel will, quote, retaliate against the West for Ye's anti-Semitic remarks, Maher asked the former Israeli prime minister to respond to a series of quotes from American Congress members, which he argues are evidence that anti-Semitism is as big a problem on the left as it is on the right. He goes on to execute a familiar pivot, characterizing a substantive criticism of the treatment of Palestinians by Israel as de facto anti-Semitism.
I just want to read a few quotes from American congressmen, Congress people rather, just to show that Kanye West's comment is not really out of order with some things that are said by people in more official positions. Here's one: Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. 10 years ago, if you read that to me, I thought that would be from Hezbollah. That's an American congressperson. Another American congressperson says the reality of Israel's apartheid government, goes on to say the occupation and ethnic cleansing Palestinians live with every day. Another one says Israel targets media sources so the world can't see Palestinians being massacred. I have three questions for you. Are you massacring Palestinians? Are you ethnic cleansing? And are you an apartheid state?
No, no, and no. I mean, these are all ridiculous charges against the one democracy in the Middle East, the one democracy that upholds human rights, that defends freedom, and is America's best allies.
Now, I want to be very clear about this. The first quote Maher read about Israel having hypnotized the world, which is from Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, is inexcusable in its promotion of anti-Semitic tropes. Omar has acknowledged this and apologized, writing, "In all sincerity, it was after my CNN interview that I heard from Jewish orgs that my use of the word hypnotize and the ugly sentiment it holds was offensive. I have no interest in defending that statement or pushing any Jewish person to accept that apology. None at all." But the next statement is of a very different character. Let's take a closer look. The statement is a tweet from Rashida Tlaib, which Maher notably does not include in full, nor does he include the broader context. Tlaib had tweeted, "The reality of Israel's apartheid government, supported by billions in unconditional American funding, cannot be denied. We will not allow the president's visit to whitewash the brutality of the occupation and ethnic cleansing Palestinians must live with every day." Tlaib's statement quote tweeted a statement from Jewish Voice for Peace and Action, an organization of Jews and allies working for peace and equality for all Palestinians and Israelis. Jewish Voices for Peace's statement was directed at President Joe Biden, who was visiting Israel at the time. The organization tweeted a statement from Tlaib that criticized the Israeli government for forcing 1,000 Palestinians out of their homes in Masafer Yatta, a Palestinian community on the West Bank, so that the Israeli military could use the land for military training exercises. Quote, "U.S. war crimes are literally happening under your nose," emphasized the Jewish pro-peace organization. UN human rights experts at the time urgently called on Israel and the international community to stop the forced evictions, which an Israeli court determined were lawful on the basis that, get this, Aerial maps from the 1980s showed no permanent settlements. The rub, that the residents of the land are nomadic people who often occupy the region's caves rather than standalone structures, making the probative value of aerial maps moot at best and pretextual at worst. I say all of this to make it clear that Tlaib's tweet was not a subjective personal claim based in anti-Semitism. It was an assessment of a state, Israel, and its actions against a community, an assessment that's backed by human rights authorities like the UN and Amnesty International. These same humanitarian organizations have also described Israel as an apartheid state. For example, UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied region, Michael Link, explained earlier this year that, quote, there is today in the Palestinian territory occupied by Israel since 1967 a deeply discriminatory dual legal and political system that privileges the 700,000 Israeli Jewish settlers living in the 300 illegal Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. In a UN report released just this past Tuesday, UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese wrote, quote, realizing the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination requires dismantling once and for all the Israeli settler colonial occupation and its apartheid practices. And that's not all. Israel's former Attorney General has characterized his own country as an apartheid regime. Former chair of Israel's Meretz party echoed these sentiments in 2006, accusing Netanyahu of operating at the service of the apartheid lobby. There's a long list of Israeli leaders who have echoed this claim, and you can read about them in this MSNBC op-ed by Mehdi Hassan, but I won't belabor the point. It is obviously the case that if criticizing a state's actions were considered to be de facto anti-Semitism, that would provide a level of cover to said state to enact horrific abuses without any international criticism. And it would make anti-Semites out of a significant number of Israeli citizens, American Jews, and Israeli political leaders. Describing Israel as having occupied Palestinian territory is uncontroversial at this point, as is the two-tiered system of rights in the region, aka apartheid. Netanyahu all but admits this in the interview. Take a listen.
But could you become an apartheid state? The critics of Israel here in America and some in your own country talk about the fact that Israel is kind of a population time bomb, and that if 51% of Israel would become Arab, because you do have Arab citizens who are actually treated better in Israel with more rights and more freedoms than they are in their own and other Arab countries. But if 51% of Israel became Arab, then you would have to become an apartheid state. Is that something that you think about as much as your critics do?
Because I think they don't have the facts right. I mean, they're about 20% of Israel's population is Arabs, and they're really the only Arabs in the Middle East who enjoy full and equal civic rights in the Israeli democracy. And I've also made it an effort to incorporate them in the tremendous success story that is Israel. And I'm happy to see that that is happening. But the demographic balance is maintained. The most important thing is the democratic balance is maintained, because everyone has a right to be part of the Israeli democracy and the Israeli success story. I don't think that's a real issue. I think it's a bogus charge.
Notice that Netanyahu compares the rights of Palestinians to other Arabs in the region, not to the rights of Jewish Israelis, whose rights quite obviously eclipse those of Palestinians. And his statements about maintaining the, quote, democratic balance give the game away. A commitment to having an explicitly Jewish state in a region which is overwhelmingly Muslim means denying the Muslim population equal participation in the political process. In April of last year, Human Rights Watch released a report detailing why Israel's actions met the definition of apartheid. They cite the same demographic threat Netanyahu openly alludes to here, along with policies aimed at mitigating said threat, like concentrating most Palestinians in dense enclaves where they lack access to basic needs like water and live under harsh authoritarian military rule. And yet speaking out about this invites harsh pushback from the political establishment. When Rashida Tlaib spoke out against progressives who ignore the plight of Palestinians, or so-called progressives who ignore the plight of the Palestinians, former DNC chair and Clinton booster Debbie Wasserman Schultz accused Tlaib of anti-Semitism. To be clear, anti-Semitism is real and rising in the United States. Who can forget the chilling images from Charlottesville, where dozens of men with torches chanted, "The Jews will not replace us," before one white supremacist killed counter-protester Heather Heyer with his car. The following year, an anti-Semite killed 11 Jewish worshippers at the Tree of Life synagogue and wounded 6 others, described as the deadliest rampage against Jewish people in U.S. history. Despite the conservative leanings of these white nationalists and their at times open identification with conservatives like Donald Trump, Trump avoided condemning the Charlottesville anti-Semitism. Remember this from the 2020 debates?
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
Are you
I'm willing
prepared
to do
specifically
that, but
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing. This is a left-wing problem.
Like Trump, Netanyahu engages in both siderism in this interview, saying the communists blame the Jews for being capitalist, the capitalists blame the communists for being the Jews for being communists. Rather, if you have a problem, blame the Jews. But that's a gross oversimplification of American history. It was Jewish communists who were disproportionately targeted during the McCarthy era for advocating for a pro-worker progressive communist government, not the other way around. Joe McCarthy was documented as having defended Nazis, and the House Committee on Un-American Activities that targeted so-called subversives who dared to hold anti-establishment political views targeted Jews. One after the other, the people in effect put on trial by the committee were Jews. Not exclusively so, but enough to make the case, writes historian Michael Friedland. Certainly, anti-Semitism can be found everywhere, including on the left. But in this interview, Maher and Netanyahu do not mete out their critiques evenly. In fact, they applaud Donald Trump for being, quote, good to Israel. And while Maher attempts some critique of Trump for his role in 1/6, Bibi Netanyahu demurs.
And there is no doubt that Donald Trump, as president, was good to Israel. Got the capital moved to Jerusalem, which had been on the table for a very long time, and these accords that you mentioned happened in that administration. But can you keep those two ideas in your head at the same time, that he was good to Israel, but he's also a dangerous demagogue who tried to have a coup in this country and does not respect democracy or democratic norms?
Well, you know, I've had enough with Israeli politics, so I'm going to leave that to you.
With anti-Semitism on the rise, it is important to call out anti-Semitism when it rears its head. And part of that is calling out anti-Semitism even when it's being offered up by folks who are, quote unquote, good to Israel for geopolitical reasons, even as they fail to support Jewish people who are attacked on the basis of their faith. This episode of Bill Maher's show was ostensibly a conversation, remember, about Ye's genuinely anti-Semitic remarks. So I ask you again, why was only a sliver of time devoted to anti-Jewish sentiment from a Trump-aligned conservative? Why the pivot to criticizing legitimate humanitarian concerns from a progressive congresswoman who criticized not Jewish people, but a country whose actions against the people of Palestine are at this point uncontroversially understood as occupation and apartheid? As AIPAC, a pro-Israel lobbying group, is increasingly involved in U.S. elections, often targeting progressives in Democratic primaries, including Jewish progressives, it is important to be able to criticize Israel-aligned groups without said criticism being conflated with antagonism for people who are Jewish. And it is important that real moments of anti-Semitism, like statements made by Ye, are not minimized by those seeking to use this moment to fight geopolitical battles. This episode of Maher's show was one of the most appalling examples of whataboutism I've ever seen, so much so that even his own audience turned against him. Quote, every single time I tune into a YouTube Bill Maher clip, I find his humor and his take on religion and politics and popular culture absolutely spot on. He's so adept at capturing the essence of a story with a prodigiously incisive wit. So after watching this, I'm left asking the question, what the F happened this time? Said one top poster. Quote, Bill, it's just asking the barman if the beer is good. Of course it is. Of course Israel's not doing anything wrong if you ask him. Come on, I expected more from you, said another. If Maher is interested in having a real conversation about anti-Semitism, I'd love to host it here or on any other platform. But this wasn't real engagement with the problem of anti-Semitism. It was a PSA for occupation, and Maher's audience was poorly served by it. So that got a lot of pushback. His interview did, not just for the reasons that I articulated, but because Benjamin Netanyahu is also in the middle of a corruption scandal that Maher asked him 0 questions about. It was all softball lobs, and it was really weird to watch something that was ostensibly about Kanye West, 90% of which ended up being about these progressive congresswomen's tweets and kind of defending Israel's actions in the region.
Yeah, well, I mean, he should have been asked about the corruption allegations, although with those kinds of interviews, you never know if, like, a condition of landing the interview was we're only going to talk about
but that's the problem.
These kinds of subjects.
That's exactly the problem. People are asking, why do you invite Benjamin Netanyahu on for a segment to talk about Kanye West tweets?
Yeah. But we did get around to, I mean, the Ilhan Omar quote, as you acknowledged, was genuinely very, very, very badly.
Yeah.
What she said was bad.
She acknowledged I have no interest in defending it.
Yeah. So, like, you can find, and you talk about, rising hate crimes against Jewish people, et cetera. Like, these are often not ideological, as far as I can tell, or they're certainly not traceable to a discernible right-wing ideology. It's not.
The Tree of Life synagogue person.
That one was, and then a couple months later there was the knifing attack during a Hanukkah. That was just a mentally ill African American man. The attacks on the streets of New York are mentally ill people, by and large, committed by black people.
But Robbie, why is this deflection from?
It's not deflection.
No one in the Democratic Party has an issue, and no one on the left has an issue saying that any one of those attacks is horrific. And anti-Semitism, people attacking people on the basis of being Jewish and on the basis of their faith and ethnicity is patently wrong. As we saw in that clip, when Donald Trump was asked to simply say that on the debate stage, he couldn't, and he famously said, stand back and stand by, and offered a lot of tacit support to groups like the Proud Boys.
Tacit support? I think he could have condemned them much more full-throatedly, sure.
So look, on one side you have Ilhan Omar called out for a very bad tweet, a very bad statement, saying, that was wrong, it was anti-Semitic, and I shouldn't do it. When asked to do the same, Donald Trump does not
say what she said.
And at the same time, but there are people who are openly expressing their support for Donald Trump and had a tragic event where they ended up killing someone in the course of their protests. Donald Trump was asked to disavow them because they expressed their support for him. That's not his fault, right? People can like you and you can't like them back. But then you have to say, oh, I don't like you back and I disavow what you're doing. Donald Trump demurred, wasn't willing to say that. And then in the course of the interview that we just watched, Benjamin Netanyahu and Bill Maher go out of their way to give credit to Trump and laud Trump for being quote unquote good to Israel. And this is the fundamental problem. The conservatives who are often the white supremacist energy in this country is right aligned. It is. And so there is this weird way in which being good to Israel and supporting these kind of hawkish policies, which still the majority of the Democratic Party, the majority of the Republican Party support, despite there being this niche anti-war movement within the Republican Party now. But the majority of Republicans have substituted the idea of being pro-Israel for its own world-building geopolitical reasons with the idea of being a friend of Jewish people, including Jewish people in the United States. And that is a dangerous conflation because it means every criticism of what the Israeli state does is described as anti-Semitism.
Obviously, I don't think it's de facto anti-Semitic to criticize some aspect of the Israeli government or even to question giving aid to Israel, as Republican figures, including Rand Paul, routinely do and oppose. I'm more so I agree with you on that, and the interview was kind of all over the place. But I take umbrage at characterizing the rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes as discernibly attached as maybe you're not doing, but I see done in the media all the time. Well, the rise in bullying in school, everything is about the Trump effect, and it's not.
Yeah, I do want to be careful about it. It's not Republicans' fault. There are people who can do crazy things that can articulate their support of any number of parties, and that's not their fault. I completely agree with you on that. But what I think earned Donald Trump a different degree of scrutiny at that moment was an unwillingness to disavow what should have been a no-brainer. In the same way that I gotta say Ilhan Omar was willing to do.
But I'm saying, but they're not the same thing, because she said something really bad and then she apologized for it, as she should.
Yeah, well, all I know is that if somebody were doing horrific things in my name and being anti-Semitic in my name, I would say obviously that wasn't something that I supported. And it wouldn't have been the media cycle that it ended up being for the reasons that I think most people understood. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Briahna. We'll have more Rising right after this. Don't touch that dial.